Now, the number of pupils doing homeschooling has doubled since the pandemic hit South Africa. 300,000 are now learning from home. And this is due to fears around COVID-19 and the increasing options available for online learning, of course. But the change can have a social and psychological impact on pupils and parents. Optimi Home Affairs or Home Office educational solutions to home learners. That's schools, colleges and workplaces, of course. But Schoonwinkel is now with us this morning, and she will discuss the challenges and benefits of homeschooling. Louise, thank you so much for joining us this morning. She is, of course, the Managing Director of OptiHome. I need to ask you this very first question. What are the social and emotional, psychological impacts of home and online schooling?
So I think, thank you for having me this morning. I think it really depends on the individual learner. And I think this is something very important to understand when parents consider homeschooling or online learning. Every learner is unique and every learner will act differently and experience methods of learning differently. Therefore, the social or emotional impact could be very positive on a learner who's homeschooling, depending on what that learner's experience was in mainstream schooling. So, for example, if you were bullied in mainstream schooling, or you were one of the kids who just didn't flourish in that setup, online learning or homeschooling could be that sweet spot where your learning really takes off and you really start flourishing. What we've seen, though, through this whole pandemic is that it's not suitable for all learners. So some learners get really depressed because they feel isolated, they feel like they're at home. That's why it's extremely important, if you are considering homeschooling or online learning, that you find your community out there. I think it's one of the biggest myths probably is that all homeschoolers end up in a basement somewhere playing video games the whole day as adults. That's not the truth. This is actually a very active community. You would have seen, I don't know, those of you who are active on homeschooling platforms, all the different matric farewells that's been hosted for homeschoolers, for example. Homeschoolers take part in various extramural activities because they often have more time to do so. There they form bonds and friendships. So it's a massive myth that homeschoolers are completely isolated and they're always at home on their own and never get any social interaction. But then, of course, there's social interaction and then there's emotional and psychological effects. And there, I think it's really important to gauge where your child is at. And that is something in our online school that Impact will be assisting with. So we have an app, we've partnered with the It's OK app. We will be measuring learners' emotional engagement on a daily basis. And we also have a full-time counselor on board who will be assisting learners where we see there might be an issue.
Now, for a parent listening right now, Louise, you know, what would you tell them if they are considering homeschooling or online learning? I mean, we have, I think, the new online school, UCT, they've launched their high school now. And I think the first applicants, there were like more than 3,000 kids that wanted to attend. So that's going to be, you know, the trend almost sort of now that parents are going to follow online learning because we are scared of COVID-19 and all these other issues that are related to you know, traditional schooling. So what do you have to say to parents listening right now? What advice can you give them if they are considering to do online learning?
So I think it starts with doing your homework and making sure you understand what the provider is offering. So not all online schools and online learning and distance learning curriculums are the same. To give you an example, at Impact, we have a homeschooling curriculum that's very much self-directed. There you get guidance on a daily basis of what you need to do, but you do it by yourself. And we have live interactive classes, but about once or twice a week that learners can attend, and an online platform. And their learners often make use of a tutor to support them in more difficult subjects. Where with our online school, it's very much school at home. So there you'll be following a fixed structure and schedule. So I think, first of all, as parents, do your research. The different online schools have different methods of teaching, and make sure you pick something that will fit in with your family schedule and timetable, and also your children's personalities and what they would need. Second of all, look for a provider that has been there and done that, has experience, someone that where you're sure the grade 12 that will be offered is accredited. So make sure they're registered with one of the 3 bodies, exam bodies in South Africa where you can do NSC through. Also, really look at your individual child. So you might find in your family with 3 children, one child will find online schooling like a really suitable method, and your other children will be those that really flourish in mainstream schooling. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and this is a decision that needs to be made as a family, together as a family. Everyone needs to be on board. It doesn't help that as a mom, you're really positive, you want to do this, and your 16-year-old is saying, Mom, I really don't want to, because then it's not going to work. But we have seen, and most parents would have experienced some form of homeschooling during this pandemic, and you would have seen, is your child one of those children who flourish in this environment or not? And I think that's really important, to be honest with yourself as a family and consider if this is an option that would work for you.
Now, Louise, based on current trends and, South Africa specifically, is this now the way forward for most South Africans? Do you think it's going to be something that a lot more South African parents are going to be considering?
So we can see that already. A lot more parents are considering it. There's cost benefits to it, depending on the form of schooling you're currently doing. So if you're in a private school, you're probably going to find that your online schooling fees will be cheaper. But then there's other considerations. And I think, unfortunately, in South Africa, currently this is not an option that's accessible to all our learners, because you would need Wi-Fi at home. You would need a laptop or a device to do your online schooling from, and that becomes tricky for a lot of families in South Africa. But what we've certainly seen is that something that we're quite clear that the market wasn't ready for this 3 years ago. The pandemic has sped up people's digital capabilities. So, for example, a family who didn't have Wi-Fi at home 2 years ago, both parents started working from home and they installed fiber this year. So I think our market is a lot more ready for this. We're a lot more ready for remote learning and working. And that's something that excites us. And this is also an opportunity to bridge that gap in quality education, because you can take a really good teacher and utilize them across the board. Where with a brick and mortar school, you don't have that opportunity to use your teacher across a couple of different schools. So I think there's exciting opportunities, but we need the private sector to assist and come to the party with this. Otherwise, it won't be something that's accessible to all our learners. We will be offering bursaries.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to bring that in. I wanted to bring the private sector in, and I wanted to bring government in as well. What's the role that they can play? Because you mentioned that, so many South African households, so many South African parents, kids, they don't have access to these basic, well, what we call basic things like internet access and the devices that you need for online learning. So what can the private sector, specifically also the government, do to help this become a possibility for those families?
And I think the government was also, I think the Department of Basic Education is probably one of the departments who was hit the most by the COVID pandemic. They had to adjust on a monthly basis. So this is something that will have to evolve. First of all, I think we need to start regulating our online learning providers so that we make sure it's good quality across the board. And then there will have to be partnerships to ensure that we can get learning to everyone. Imagine a world where we actually have Wi-Fi installed in our rural areas that government's paying for, and then the private sector can assist with devices. So immediately that becomes, if we can cross that barrier, it immediately becomes accessible for all our learners. I think what we're already starting to see is that a lot of private institutions are offering bursaries, and we'll be offering a few bursaries at the end of this year to assist learners. We will be assisting with devices and internet access, but that's not enough. We need to get to a point where we can help the millions of learners out there who actually needs this the most.
Thank you so much. That was Louise Schoonwinkel, Managing Director of Optimi Home, of course, talking about online learning and South Africa's way forward when it comes to this.